Hi, my name is Dilys and I'm a compulsive overeater. I looked first at my childhood when I was looking at my experience, and I cannot blame my childhood for my compulsive overeating. My parents kept a very strict control over my life, including my food and the school to a certain extent. And my parents had, I don't know if it was because of shortage of money or whether it was their basic belief, I think probably both, but we were not given added sugar, or we had limited added sugar in our diet. We were given no sweets. We weren't allowed caffeine. We did have the odd sweet, usually from outsiders. And nobody made a fuss about that, but it was not part of our life. My mother was an expert baker, but she didn't bake for us. She baked for the other things, church and social occasions. And so I cannot blame my childhood for that. There may have been physical, emotional, and spiritual influences that did contribute, but the physical would have been an inherited tendency. The emotional would have been my mother had a bit of a wartime mentality, and I may have inherited that. But we were given a very solid spiritual foundation, which was somewhere to start when I started to think for myself. My compulsive overeating began when I left home out of this very strict control, because I was sent to institutions and they typically give a lot of carbohydrate in the diet. And I went a bit wild. My basic weight was 127 pounds as an adult, and it started going up until I was 152 pounds about 3 years later. And I began yo-yo dieting. Also, my mother became obsessed with my diet. She never said anything about my sister, but who also had a slight problem in a different way. But she was obsessed with my diet and was very irritating. I also, once I got married, I tended to go to diet clubs. I became obsessive about exercise. But in my first 2 pregnancies, I had very strict specialists in charge of my pregnancies, and they were particularly fussy about not putting on too much weight. And I cared enough about my future baby to comply. Then we had 4 years in South Africa where we were very short of money. And I became very interested in nutrition because I had a family to feed and I wanted to do the best for them on whatever money we had. The rot set in. I started to study nutrition, but not formally. The rot set in with my 3rd pregnancy, where the GP was not that fussy about me putting on weight. The family diet became more relaxed. We were back in Rhodesia, as it was then. And I had less control over my family in general. My mother-in-law was there, and she was very typically gave us a lot to eat and sweets for the children. I also developed exhaustion, and the doctor said, there's nothing wrong with you. But gradually my weight crept up to 186 pounds. I then recognized myself in another person who broke her anonymity to share, and I realized that I was also an overeater. So I began going, she put me in touch with the meetings, which were just being founded in Harare at the time. And my basic abstinence was, and started then, which was no sugar and no caffeine. And I felt much better immediately. in all sorts of ways, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Is that 10 minutes?
No.
Oh, I thought I heard you. But I didn't lose weight. I was under a dietitian who told me to eat 6 times a day, but very little, and that was impossible for me. So with the help of my sponsor and the dietitian, I worked out a food plan and gradually lost weight. And I went down to about 140. So I lost about 45 pounds, 20 kgs, and I've never put it back on. What happened was that I went to a meeting every week. I worked my way through the program, the steps, with the help of my sponsor, and I found that it really worked for me. I also went to another 12-step program and worked the steps there as well. Now, I left Harare in January 2009 to come here, basically, and there is no meeting here. And until the beginning of lockdown, I had no meetings as such. I still had my sponsor on the telephone, and I very occasionally met her. And then lockdown hit. And one of the blessings of lockdown is Zoom. So I kept a connection with the person who had introduced me to OA, and she told me about Zoom. And here I am, and the rest is history, as you know. So this, being able to join a meeting, has been a great help. All those years, I still worked the 12 steps, carried on working steps 10, 11, and 12 particularly. And I was in touch also with my other 12-step meeting. They weren't formal meetings, but I was in touch with the members, which was a great help. So that has been my experience. A lot of it was physical, because they discovered that I had reactive hypoglycemia, which means you do not eat sugar, added sugar. And so that made a big difference to me when I realized that, when I was told that. But it wasn't enough to know that. I had to have the help of the program in order to find a food plan that allowed me to reach and maintain my ideal weight. Well, ideal. At least it's maintained and it's stable. And it's about the top of my BMI, but nobody seems to be worried, not the doctors, certainly. So that is my story, and that's what I prepared. There's a lot more I could say, because the yo-yo dieting was impossible. I knew every diet in the book, all the different diets. I could probably quote them to you to this day. I know exactly how the diet clubs work, and the fact that they don't work for me. In fact, I put on weight when I went to a diet club, because they decided that I needed to be a higher weight than I wanted to be. So I know that I'm not sane around my weight and my food, and therefore I do need the program to keep me on track. I'm finding it wonderful to be part of this Zoom meeting, be part of a wonderful meeting where there's so much recovery, and everybody sets good examples and shares. And this is meat and drink to me. The meat and drink.
That's 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So just looking at my notes to see if there's anything that I could add to that. This obsession with exercise has been there on and off all my life. And I've always been a person who's been very active. But I didn't tell you that in 2000, I lost half of my right leg. And therefore, it has been quite difficult to exercise in the same way. But I got back to swimming and I became obsessive about that during my 15, 14 years here. And I've decided now to give up swimming. But I go from one extreme to another. I go from being obsessive about exercise to doing as little as possible. But I am walking more than I have been able to with the help of my sister, who's an Alexander technique teacher and helps me with how I walk, and of course the prosthetist, whom I don't see regularly anymore, thanks to the NHS saving money. But she's not very critical of what they call my gait, G-A-I-T. And my sister has been enormously useful in helping me with that. So I'm able to walk further, and I do stretching exercises every morning. But I know I need to do more, and that I have to go back to my action plan and build that in to my day, as well as all sorts of other things that I don't do, that I have faults about. And that's also part of my program, is looking at my typical character defects at night in my 10th step and see how I've done during the day and hand it over, especially the next morning at the beginning of the day. So I think that's all I can add. My mother's obsession with my weight never stopped. I discovered it was because she had a friend at college that died of anorexia. So she was terrified on the one hand that I would become anorexic. And when I was dieting very severely, she hauled me out of that situation and sent me somewhere where I was being fed roast beef and vegetables. And I put all the weight back on, of course. But that's why she had that obsession. She must have detected something in me. She had quite good instincts. And she must have realized that I was not sane around food. And she tried to control that, which just drove me insane. I didn't like that at all. And but it wasn't the only area of my life that she controlled, I think, till the day she died. And she died in my home at the age of 85. So that's another story, my relationship with my mother. And it's all to do with control and who's in charge of my life. And the basic message that I have to myself and to other people, especially this year, is hand over, surrender, let go, and let God. And with that, I will end. Thank you.